Welcome to day 44 of reading every single day for the rest of my life. Let me double check if it's 44. I'm going to double check real quick, guys. Hold on. I hope you guys been having a great night, especially with everything happening over in the Middle East. Yes, day 44. Got it. So let's get the show on the road. I am at page 19 of the Fellowship of the King. Let's go, baby. Fellowship of the King. Let's go, baby. All right. I'm going to start this here book, and we're going to get rolling. I got 30 minutes starting now. Let's go. Of the ordering of the Shire. The Shire was divided into 4 quarters, the farthings already referred to north, south, east, and west, and these again each into a number of Falklands, which still bore the names of some of the old leading families, although by the time of this history these names were no longer found only in the proper Falklands. Nearly all Tooks still lived in the Tookland, but that was not true of many other families, such as the Beganisons or the Boffins. Outside the Farthings were the East and the West Marches, the Buckland, and the West Marches added to the Shire in SR 1462. The Shire at the time had hardly any government. Families, for the most part, managed their own affairs. Growing food and eating it occupied most of their time. In other matters they were, as a rule, generous and not greedy, but contented and moderate, so that estates, farms, workshops, and small trades tended to remain unchanged for generations. There remained, of course, the ancient tradition concerning the High King at Fornost, or Nornbury, as they called it, away north of Shire. But there had been no king for nearly 1,000 years, and even the ruins of King Norbury were covered with grass. Yet the hobbits still said of the wild folk and wicked things, such as trolls, that they had not heard of the king. For they attributed to the king of old all their essential laws, and usually they kept the law of free will, because they were the rules, as they said, both ancient and just. It is true that the Took family had long been preeminent, for the office of Thane had passed to them from Old Buck some centuries there before, and the chief Took had borne that title ever since. The Thane was a master of the Shire Moot, and captain of the Shire Muster and the Hobbitry in arms, but as muster and moot were only held in times of emergency, which no longer occurred, the Thanemanship had ceased to be more than a nominal dignity. The Took family was still, indeed, accorded a special respect, for it remained both numerous and exceedingly wealthy, and was liable to produce in every generation strong characters of peculiar habits and even adventurous temperament. The latter qualities, however, were now rather tolerated in the rich than generally approved. The custom endured none the less of referring to the head of the family as the Took, and of added to his name, if required, a number such as Insegrim the Second, for instance. The only real official in the Shire at this date was the mayor of the Michael Delving, or of the Shire, who was elected every 7 years of the free fair on the white downs of the Lith, that is at midsummer. As mayor, almost his only duty was to preside at banquets given on the Shire holidays, which occurred at frequent intervals. Morality, so that he managed both the messenger service and the watch. These were the only Shire services, and the messengers were the most numerous, and much the busier of the two. By no means all hobbits were lettered, but those who wrote constantly to their friends, and a selection of their relations who lived further than an afternoon's walk. The sheriffs was the name that the hobbits gave to their police, the nearest equivalent that they possessed. They had, of course, no uniforms, such things being quite unknown, only a feather in their caps, and they were in practice rather Hayward than policemen, more concerned with the straying of beasts than of people. There were in all the Shire only 12 of them, Shire only 12 of them, 3 in each farthing, for inside work. A rather larger body, varying at need, was employed to beat the bounds and see that outsiders of any kind, great and small, did not make themselves a nuisance. At the same time, when the story begins, the bounders, as they were called, had not been greatly increased. There were many reports and complaints of strange persons and creatures prowling about the borders over them, the first sign that all was not quite as well it should be, and always had been except in tales of legends of long ago. Few heeded the sign, and not even Bilbo yet had any notion of what it portended. 60 years had passed since he set out on his memorable journey, and he was old even for hobbits, who reached 100 as often as not, but much evidently still remained at the considerable wealth that had brought back how much or how little he revealed to no one, not even to Frodo, his favorite nephew, and he still kept secret the ring that he had found. 4. Of the finding of the ring. As is told in The Hobbit, there came one day to Bilbo's door the great wizard Gandalf the Grey, and 13 dwarfs with him, none other indeed than Thorin Oakenshield, descendant of kings, and his 12 companions in exile. With them he set out to his own lasting astonishment. On the morning of April, it being the year of 1341 Shire reckoning, on a quest of great treasure, the dwarf hordes of the kings under the mountain beneath Erebor in Dale, far off in the east. The quest was successful, and the dragon that guarded the horde was destroyed. Yet though before all this was won the battle of 5 armies was fought, the Thorin was slain, and many deeds of renown were done. The matter would scarcely have concerned later history, or earned more than a vote in the long annals of the Third Age, but for an ancient accident by the way. The party was assailed by orcs in a high pass of the Misty Mountains as they went toward the Winderland. And so it happened that Bilbo was lost for a while in the black orc mines, deep under the mountains. And there, as he groped in the vein of the dark, he put his hand on a ring lying on the floor of a tunnel. He put it in his pocket. It seemed then like mere luck. Trying to find his way out, Bilbo went down to the roots of the mountains until he could go no further. At the bottom of the tunnel lay a cold lake far from the light, and on an island of rock in the water lived Gollum. He was a lonesome little creature. He paddled a small boat with his large flat feet, peering with pale luminous eyes and catching a blind fish with the long fingers, and eating them raw. He ate any living thing, even orc, if he could catch it and strangle it without a struggle. He possessed a secret treasure that had come to him long ages ago, when he lived still in the light, a ring of gold that made its wearer invisible. It was the one thing he loved, his precious, and he talked to it, even when it was not with him, for he kept it hidden safe in a hole in his island, except when he was hunting or spying on the orcs of the mines. Maybe he would have attacked Bilbo at once, if the ring had been on him when they met, but it was not, and the hobbit held in his hand an elvish knife, which served him as a sword. So to gain time, Gollum challenged Bilbo to the riddle game, saying that if he asked a riddle which Bilbo could not guess, then he would kill him and eat him. But if Bilbo defeated him, then he would do as Bilbo wished. He would lead him to a way out of the tunnels. Since he was lost in the dark without hope and could not neither go nor back, Bilbo accepted the challenge, and they asked one another many riddles. In the end, Bilbo won the game, more by luck, as it seemed, than by wits, for he was stumped at last for the riddle to ask, and cried out, as his hand came upon the ring he had picked up and forgotten, "What have I got in my pocket?" This Gollum failed to answer, though he demanded 3 guesses. The authorities, it is true, differ whether this last question was a mere question and not a riddle, according to the district rules of the game, but all agree that after accepting it and trying to guess the answer, Gollum was bound by his promise, and Bilbo pressed him to keep his word, for the thought came to him that this slimy creature might prove false, even though such promises were held sacred, and of old all but the wickedest things feared to break them. But after ages alone in the dark, Gollum's heart was black, and treachery was in it. He slipped away and returned to his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing, not far off in the dark water. There, he thought, lay his ring. He was hungry now, and angry, and once his precious was with him he would not fear any weapon at all. But the ring was not in the island. He had lost it. It was gone. His screech sent a shiver down Bilbo's back, though he did not understand what had happened. But Gollum had at last leaped to a guess, too late. "What has it got in its pockets?" he cried. The light in his eyes was like a green flame as he sped back to murder the hobbit and recover his precious. Just in time Bilbo saw his peril, and he fled blindly up the passage away from the water. And once more he and the ring slipped quietly onto his finger. So it was that the Gollum passed him without seeing him, and went on to guard the way out, lest the thief should escape. Warily Bilbo followed him as he went along, cursing and talking to himself about his precious, from which talk at last even Bilbo guessed the truth, and hope came to him in the darkness. He had found the marvelous ring, and had a chance of escape from the orcs and from Gollum. At length they came to a halt before an unseen opening that led to the lower gates of the mines, on the eastward side of the mountains. There Gollum crouched at bay, smelling and listening, and Bilbo was tempted to slay him with his sword. But pity stayed him, and though he kept the ring in which his only hope lay, he would not use it to help him kill the wretched creature at a disadvantage. In the end, gathering his courage, he leaped over Gollum in the dark, and fled away down the passage, pursued in his enemy cries of hate and despair. "Thief! Thief! Baggins, we hate it forever!" Now it is curious fact that it is not the story as Bilbo first told it to his companions. To them his account was that the Golem had promised to give him a present if he won the game, but when Gollum went to fetch it from his island he found the treasure was gone, a magic ring which had given him long ago on his birthday. Bilbo guessed that this was the very ring that he had found, and he had won the game. It was already his by right. But being in the tight place, he said nothing about it, and made Gollum show him the way out, as a reward instead of a present. This account Bilbo set down in his memoirs, and he seemed never to have altered it himself, not even after the Council of Elrond. Evidently, it still appeared in the original Red Book, as it did in several of the copies and abstracts. But many copies contain the true account as an alternative, derived no doubt from notes by Frodo or Samwise. Both of them learned the truth, though they seem to have been unwilling to delete anything actually written by the old hobbit himself. Gandalf, however, disbelieved Bilbo's first story as soon as he heard it, and continued to be very curious about the ring. Eventually, he got the true tale out of Bilbo after questioning, which for a while strained their friendship. But the wizard seemed to think the truth important. Though he did not say so to Bilbo, he also thought it important and disturbing to find that the good hobbit had not told the truth from the first. Quite contrary to his habit, the idea of a present was not mere hobbit-like invention. All the same, it was suggested to Bilbo, as he confessed, by Gollum's talk that he overheard, for Gollum did, in fact, call the ring his birthday present many times. That also Gandalf thought strange and suspicious, but he did not discover the truth at this point for many more years, as will be seen in this book. Of Bilbo's later adventures, little more need to be said here. With the help of the ring, he escaped from the orc guards at the gate and rejoined his companions. He used the rings many times on his quest, chiefly for the help of his friends, but he kept it secret from them as long as he could. After his return to his home, he never spoke of it again to anyone else, save Gandalf and Frodo, and no one else on the Shire knew of his existence, or so he believed. Only to Frodo did he show the account of his journey that he was writing. His sword, Sting Bilbo, hung over his fireplace in his coat of marvelous mail, the gift of the dwarves from the dragon hoard. He lent to the museum, to the Michael Delving modern house, in fact, but he kept in a drawer at Bag End the old cloak and hood that he had worn on his travels, and the ring, secured by a fine chain, remained in his pocket. He returned to his home at Bag End on June 22nd in his 50th year, SR 1342, and nothing very notable occurred on the Shire until Mr. Baggins began the preparations for the celebration of his 111th birthday, SR 1401, At this point, this history begins. Note on the Shire records. At the end of the Third Age, the part played by the hobbits in the great events that led to the inclusion of the Shire in the reunited kingdom awakened among them a more widespread interest in their own history, and many of their traditions, up to that time still mainly moral, were collected and written down. The greater families were also concerned with events in the kingdom at large, and many of their members studied its ancient histories and legends. By the end of the first century of the Fourth Age, there were already to be found in the Shire several libraries that contained many historical books and records. The largest of these collections were probably at Undertowers, at Great Smeals, and at Brandy Hall. This account of the end of the Third Age is drawn mainly from the Red Book of Westmarch. That most important source of this history of the War of the Ring was so called because it was long preserved at Undertowers, the home of the Fairbrines, wardens of the Westmarch. It was in origin Bilbo's private diary, which he had took with him to Rindelval. Frodo brought it back to the Shire, together with many loose leaves of notes during SR 1420-01. He nearly filled its pages with his account of the war, but annexed to it preserved with it, probably in a single red case, were the 3 large volumes, bound in leather, that Bilbo gave to him as a parting gift. To these 4 volumes there were added in Westmarch a 5th containing commentaries, genealogies, and various other matters concerning the Hobbit members of the Fellowship. The original Red Book has not been preserved, but many copies were made, especially of the first volume, for the first use of descendants of the children of Master Samwise. The most important copy, however, has a different history. It was kept at Great Smeals, but it was written in Gondor, probably at the request of the great-grandson of Peregrine, and completed in SR 1592, FA set 172. Its southern scribe appended this note. Finagil, King's writer, finished this work in 5172. It is an exact copy in all the details of the Thane's book in the Minas Tirith. That book was a copy made at the request of King Elisar of the Red Book of the Pirinath, and was brought to him by the Thane Peregrine when he retired to Gondor in 564. The Thane's book was thus the first copy made of the Red Book, and contained much that was later omitted or lost. In Minas Tirith it received much annotation and many corrections, especially of names, words, and quotations of the Elvish languages, and there was added to it an abbreviated version of those parts of the tale of Aragon and Arwen, which lie outside the account of war. The full tale is stated to have been written by Bohor, grandson of the steward Frenmar, some time after the passing of the king, but the chief importance of Finagil's copy is that it alone contains the whole of Bilbo's translation from the Elvish. These 3 volumes were found to be work of great skill and learning, in which, between 1403 and 1418, he had used all the sources available to him in Rivendell, both living and written. But since they were little used by Frodo, being almost entirely concerned with the elder days, no more is said of them here. Since Meriadoc and Peregrine became the heads of their great families, and at the same time kept up their connections with Rohan and Gondor, the libraries at the Bucklebury and Turkerbrowey contained much that did not appear in the Red Book. In Brandy Hall there were so many works dealing with Eriador and the history of Rohan. Some of these were composed to begun of Meriadoc himself, though in the Shire he was chiefly remembered for his Hereblow of the Shire, for his reckoning of the years in which he discussed the relation of the calendars of the Shire and Bree and those Rivendell, Gondor, and Rohan. He also wrote a short treatise of old wars and names in the Shire, showing special interest in discovering the kinship of the language of the Rohirrim, of such Shire words as Matham and old elements in place names. At Great Smeals, the books were less of interest in Shire folk, though more important the larger history. None of them was written by Peregrine, but he and his successors collected many manuscripts written by scribes of Gondor. Many copies of summaries of histories of legends related to Endil and his heirs. Only here in the Shire were to be found extensive materials of the history of Nunnemor and the rising of Sauron. It was probably at Great Smeals that the tale of years was put together, with the assistance of material collected by Meriadoc. See Appendix B. Represented in much reduced form, Appendix B, as far as the end of the Third Age. Though the dates given are not conjectural, especially for the Second Age, they deserve attention. It is probable that Meriadoc obtained assistance and information from Rivendell, which he visited more than once. There, though Elrond had departed, his sons long remained, together with some of the high elven folk. It is said that Celeborn went to dwell there after the departure of Galadriel, but there is no record of the day when at last he sought the Grey Havens, and with him went the last living memory of the elder days in Middle-earth. Dang, we got a map here. West Farthing, South Farthing, Green Hill Country, a part of the Shire, Overbourne Marshes. God, I'm so excited for this book. I just got a recap on The Hobbit, basically. In history on Bilbo. This is awesome. I love this fantasy book. Now I'm about to go into chapter 1. I still got 10 minutes to read. So let's see. Yeah, I can get pretty far. So yeah, let's start with chapter 1. Chapter 1. A long-expected party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. At 99, they began to call him well-preserved, but unchanged, would have been nearer the mark. There were some that took their heads and thought that this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess, apparently, perpetual youth as well as reputable, inexhaustible wealth. It will have to be paid for, they said. It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. But as far trouble had not come, and as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him for his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Bagginese, and he had many admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The eldest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir, and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September 22nd. "You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo one day, "and then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together." At that time Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20 between childhood and coming of age 33. Irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year the Bagginese had given very lively combined birthday parties at Bag End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for that autumn. Bilbo was going to be 111, a rather curious number, and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old Took himself had only reached 130, and Frodo was going to be 33, an important number, the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and rumor of the coming event traveled all over the Shire. The history of the character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found the reminiscences in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as Guyfer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn in the Baywater Road, and he spoke with some authority. He had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived in the hill itself in number 3 Bagshot Road, just below Bag End. A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I have always said, the Gaffer declared, with perfect truth. For Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfist, and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables. In the matter of roots, especially potatoes, the Gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all of the neighborhood, including himself. But what was this Frodo that lives with him? Asked old Noakes of Bywater. Baggins is his name, but he's more than half of a brandy buck, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away in their buckland where folks are so queer. And no wonder they're queer, put it in Daddy Twofoot, the Gopher's next-door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandwater River and the right edge in the Old Forest, that's the dark place of it half the tales be true. You're right, Dad, said the Gopher. You're right, Dad, said the Gopher. Not that the Brandybucks of Buckland live in the Old Forest, but they're a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about the boats on that big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say. But be that it may, Mr. Frodo is as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet, very much like Mr. Bilbo in a more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins, a decent, respectable hobbit, was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him till he was drowned. Drowned, said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course, but the hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. Well, so they say, said the Gopher. You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Permula Brandybuck. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Took's daughters, and Mr. Drogo with his second cousin. So Mr. Frodo and his first and second cousin once moved either way, as the saying is, if you follow me, and Mr. Drogo was staying at the Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, old Master Gardabuck, as he often did after his marriage, him being partial in his victuals, and old Garbadoc keeping a mighty generous table. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned, and poor Mr. Frodo only a child and all. I've heard that they went. Okay, I'm going to try to say this in character. I've heard they went on the water after dinner in the moonlight, said old Noakes, and it was Drogo's weight that sunk the boat. And I heard she pushed him in, and he pulled her after him, said Sandyman, the Hobbiton miller. You shouldn't listen to that all you hear, Sandyman. You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman, said the Gopher, who did not much like the miller. There isn't no call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough of those who are sit still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this. Mr. Frodo left an orphan of stranded, as you might say, among those queer buckerlands, being brought up anyhow in the Brandy Hall. A regular warren, by all accounts. Old Master Gordoc never had fewer than a couple of 100 relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never had a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. But I reckon it was a nasty knock for those Sackville Bagginese. They thought they were going to get Bag End that time when he went off and he was thought to be dead, but then he came back and orders them off, and he goes on living and never looking a day older. Bless him! And suddenly he produces an heir, and he has all the papers made out of proper. The Sackville Bagginese won't never see the inside of a Bag End now, or it is to be hoped not. There is a tidy bit of money tucked away up in there, there is a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell, said a stranger, a visitor on a business from Michael Devling on the Westfarthing. All up the top of your hill is full of tunnels packed with chests of gold and silver and jewels, and what I've heard. Then what you've heard more than I can speak to, answered the Goffer. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it, but I know of no tunneling making. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he came back, a matter of 60 years ago, when I was a lad. I did not long come to apprentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at a bag end helping him to keep folks from trampling and trespassing all over the garden while sale was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up to the hill with a pony and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he had picked up in foreign parts, where there would be mountains of gold, they say, but there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in out of a bag end, crazy about stories of the old days, and he listens to Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo had learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mark you, and hope no harm will come of it. Elves and dragons, I say to him. Cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I say to him. And I might say it to others, he added with a look at the stranger and the miller. But the Goffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed on the minds of the younger generations of hobbits. And that looks like that was day 44. I'm at the middle of page 32. Let's go. It was page 34. See you guys so that was day 44. See you guys day 45. Let's go.